you.
Now I'd like to call on John Nichols. He is the National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation. His most recent book is Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. He gave a talk this morning at 9, and that was his warm-up, and he's now going to give an even better one to us now. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Cole. And that's always a terrible way to introduce somebody, to say you're about to hear the best talk you've ever heard or something. I will do my very best, and I'm super honored.
That's because you are going to.
Well, it's very kind of you, Cole. I'm super honored to be with everybody here. I want to thank Cole for the convening role that he's played, and all of the other groups that are a part of this. I have worked with many of you over the years. I think especially of the Progressive Democrats of America folks from Western Massachusetts, Russell Friedman and others who I've had the honor to appear with in person over the years. And I have to tell you, I am really ready for that session where we get together in person. I was excited to be invited to join you, but disappointed when I found out we were going to be on Zoom. Not that I dislike Zoom. I've done a lot of it over the last couple of years, but the fact of the matter is, I do believe that personal connection is still the way in which we form relationships and build things out. And I will tell you that I have benefited tremendously by the connections I've made, the insights I've gained from being with you folks over the years in Boston and other places in Massachusetts. And so I'm honored to be here. Also, one quick final note, I'm very honored to be on with Jamie Eldridge. The fact of the matter is, I look across the country at state legislators. I cover politics for a living. There is a handful, and it really is a handful of legislators who are absolutely committed to economic and social and racial justice, to saving the planet and to peace. And Jamie Eldridge is one of that handful, coming from a complex district that he has to actually work to win. And you're just very lucky to have him in Massachusetts. And it is a testament to his commitment that he's here with us this morning. And so great honor and really cherishing of Jamie Eldridge over many, many years. So let's talk about politics. Look, if we were meeting 4 weeks ago, boy, would we have been depressed, right? Because we were all watching the media. We can't delink ourselves as much as we might like to. And so we were all watching media and social media. And what were we being told? Well, it was going to be a Republican wave. Could be a Republican tsunami, literally, that they were going to take the House and the Senate and governorships across the country. I even saw a report saying that there was a possibility that the Senate seat in Vermont could go Republican. And, I was like, whoa, what's going on there? And of course, it was all wrong. The fact of the matter is that we have a very failed media in this country. We have a very failed pundit class in this country. And frankly, we have a lot of political strategists who don't know what they're talking about. And so they always run the last election. They always imagine that no matter what's going on, that nothing can change. We can't really progress. We're locked into patterns. We're locked into ways that things will happen. And so a midterm election is going to produce an overwhelming result for the party that is not in power. That's almost it's the sort of accepted fantasy, right? And it allows us no progress. Well, this year, the people decided that they weren't going to go along with the accepted fantasy. And they did decide that they wanted progress. Now, it's not universal. I'm not naive. I'm not going to give you a picture where it says everything turned out perfectly. It didn't. But the fact of the matter is, you didn't get that overwhelmingly difficult and negative result that would have been undermining for, again, economic and social and racial justice, for peace and saving the planet. And why did that happen? Well, I mean, we know the basics of it. The fact of the matter is that the Republican Party, as both Cole and Jamie and some other speakers have kind of revealed to us here, Jamie especially emphasizing it, has become something fundamentally different than the Republican Party was even 5 or 6 years ago. Now, I know that we've we've been, criticizing the drift of the GOP to the right since, I don't know, since they let Strom Thurmond in 1964. So it's been a long journey to the right. Let's be very honest. But the fact of the matter is that the Republican Party went from being a ideologically diverse party in the 60s and 70s to a conservative party in the 80s and the 90s, to in the 2010s, around the time of the Tea Party, to a more activist, populist conservative party. And now, in the last 5 or 6 years, particularly in the last 2 years, it has evolved in many cases toward an authoritarian party, toward a party that is genuinely, at least in many cases, anti-democratic, literally nominating people for office who deny the results of the previous election and who propose to get power and use it to suppress votes and to use that power to warp future elections. That is the very model of an authoritarian party. And so, I mean, it's pretty scary, right? And it's infused with Christian nationalism and extreme right ideology rooted in a lot of racist thinking. It's infused with a lot of racism and xenophobia. And so this Republican Party that went into this campaign went in as a party that scared people. It's as simple as that. And the fact is, a lot of people decided they did not want to have a scary government. And so the end result was that across the country, Democrats did far better in the midterm election than at any time since 1962. 1962 was the Cuban Missile Crisis election. John Kennedy was president at that time, and the Democrats did pretty well. But in fact, if you look at the actual breakdown where things turned out, you've got to go back to 1934. This was the best midterm election for Democrats in a first term of a new Democratic president since 1934, which is amazing. And what did they do? They held on to the Senate, which at one point was considered to be a very difficult thing. They came within 3 or 4, maybe 5 seats of holding the House, did not hold it, lost it, but came very close to holding it and created a situation where the Republicans will have a very difficult time managing under the leadership of so-called leadership of Kevin McCarthy. And then the most important story, and Jamie will appreciate this, was the states. In states across the country, Democrats actually did way better than expected. And they picked up 2 governorships, one of them in Massachusetts. They had, and they won 3 new governorships, but they lost one in Nevada. But more importantly, Democrats who opposed election deniers won in the 7 states where that was a prospect that an election denier would become Secretary of State. In fact, they swept those states because of the battleground states in a presidential election. Every Secretary of State's post is now held by someone who actually believes in democracy. Now, there's one Republican, Brad Raffensperger, down in Georgia, who's frankly very troublesome on a lot of small d voting rights, or small d democracy and voting rights issues, but at least he was willing to stand up to Donald Trump. So you have all the battleground states with someone who's at least willing to accept election results. Now, that's a pretty low standard, I understand, but it's something to understand that it was achieved. And in legislative races across the country, you see a situation, Jamie was talking about Massachusetts being now, sort of a super majority or very, very Democratic state. But this is the amazing thing. Michigan, which just a couple of years ago had a Republican governor and Republican legislature, now has Democrats in every statewide elected post, and Democrats control both houses of the state legislature. In Minnesota, Democrats now control the full governance of that state. And I point to several others across the country. So it was actually a very good election for Democrats. And one other thing, beyond partisan politics, it was a very good election for progressive ideas. Abortion rights, the right to choose, won again and again in states across the country in referendums. Legalization of marijuana won even in many conservative locations. Raising wages referendums won across the country. Democracy referendums to make it easier to vote won in places like Michigan and other states across the country. And so when we look down that list, pretty good result. Now, here's the bad news. That's all the good news. And I wish I could just give you good news. The bad news is it was still a status quo election, right? The progressives, the left, made no great progress here. It wasn't like we moved toward a place where at the federal level, we're going to achieve bigger and bolder progressive legislation, that we really are going to address criminal justice issues, systemic racism, economic inequality, the military industrial complex, so many of the issues that we want to talk about today. Do we move to a place where it's going to be easier to do that? No, we didn't, because the House of Representatives will be under control of a Republican leadership that's going to be very deferent to the extreme right. It's going to be a very problematic situation. It's going to be harder for Joe Biden to govern. It's going to be harder for the Democrats to govern in general at the congressional level because of this change in the House of Representatives. We shouldn't deny that reality. What we should recognize, though, is that there are possibilities, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And we talked already a little about it. We'll talk about some in the Q&A. There are possibilities for action on a number of fronts. I think it was Kathleen brought up earlier. Are there going to be areas where you could build coalitions, for instance, on military spending? The fact is that some of these very conservative Republicans are sympathetic to reducing some military spending. Progressives have to follow the lead of Barbara Lee, who has always been willing to meet with and work with Republicans to build coalitions, to cut military spending, to oppose war. And there'll be some openings there, although complex openings. There'll be a lot of battles going forward on social welfare issues. I think we're going to be able to defend what minimal social welfare state we have. It's going to be hard to make progress on that. But I also think that as we head toward 2024, there's some very good prospects to keep in mind here. The Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives is bigger than ever. And it's adding remarkable young members who really are going to be leaders at the national level. Summer Lee in Pennsylvania, elected to Congress from an area near Pittsburgh, beat big money from AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, or Public Affairs Committee, and one of its affiliated PACs, not just in her primary, but in her general election. A huge victory for someone who is looking for peace in the Middle East, who's respectful of Israel and Palestine. That's an important victory. She comes in as somebody who can talk about these issues in ways that many, many other members have been cautious about doing. In Texas, Greg Casar, one of the great organizers in Texas. Literally think of one of your best organizers in Massachusetts, and then imagine that person going to Congress. That's Greg Casar coming out of the Austin area in Texas. In Illinois, Jonathan Jackson, Jesse Jackson's son, as well as Delia Ramirez coming to Congress as new, truly progressive members, and Maxwell Frost out of Florida. We can run down the list. These are going to be people you'll know in short order if you don't already know them, and they're going to be major leaders on these issues. I want to, because so many people on this call are peace activists. I know there's people from across the board, but all of us concerned about peace. Make note of the fact that Delia Ramirez out of Chicago made peace a major part of her campaign strategy when she won her primary and general election, wrote at length about her moral commitment to assuring that we don't enter wars of whim, that we look at that military budget, that we focus on having a better vision going forward as regards military spending, something that people should really pay attention to. Let me close off with one final thing. And that is both a challenging note and perhaps a hopeful one, but one that is especially important for organizers. While we can point to some, relatively, if you're looking at it from a partisan standpoint, to relatively positive results for the Democrats nationally and in many of the states, I want to emphasize that Democrats could have done much, much better in 2022. The Democratic Party remains too deferent to corporate money. The Democratic Party also remains too deferent to insider Washington thinking. And I can point to districts across the country where the Democratic insiders, the establishment, pulled money out of campaigns that they could have won or did not provide the resources at the time when those resources were needed. One example is the Wisconsin U.S. Senate race where Mandela Barnes, a young African-American candidate, the lieutenant governor of the state, genuine progressive, backed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, came within 26,000 votes of winning. I want to emphasize that. Out of millions of votes cast, 26,000 votes. Had he gotten those votes, he would be in the U.S. Senate now, and Democrats would be in a place where Certainly, I think the Georgia result is going to be good for Raphael Warnock, Reverend Warnock, but I want to emphasize Democrats could be up 2 seats in the Senate. That would potentially disempower Sinema and Manchin. And only 26,000 votes was the difference there. A huge amount of money was spent in that race. But in September, the Democrats at the national level did not move sufficient resources to Mandela Barnes. And as a result, he got viciously attacked by a racist ad campaign funded by out-of-state billionaires. And the fact is, he wasn't able to climb back from that. If Democrats had better strategy and frankly, a better connection with progressive candidates, I think Mandela Barnes would have won. I can also point to rural districts across the country where rural populists and progressives were running and had a real chance to win. And the Democrats at the Washington level failed to move the money to them. And the result is, in Western Wisconsin, in my state, Brad Pfaff, a farm kid from rural Wisconsin, they cut off all of his money. He had no money coming in from the national level, or virtually no money. And yet he got over 48% of the vote. He came within a whisker of winning. That's a congressional seat that Democrats could have won if they had simply recognized that you have to have a 50-state strategy and a 3,200 or 3,300 county strategy, where you literally go to the whole country and you have respect for the possibility of winning in rural and outstate areas, as well as traditional Democratic bases. The Democratic Party really radically needs to rethink its approach, because the fact of the matter is they could have held the House of Representatives. They could have increased their majority in the Senate more. And frankly, they could have done even better in some of the states. Now, hindsight's always 20/20. I understand it was a difficult year, but the fact of the matter is that activists, people who are engaged politically, whether it's at a partisan level or an issue level, and I want to emphasize, I understand it's not just electoral politics, but activists really need to pressure for a politics that is universal and that is engaged at every level and in every part of the country, not just in the places that are easy to win. The Democratic Party got really scared in 2022. It ran a cautious and unfocused campaign. Had it run a focused and energetic and offensive campaign, my sense is that 2022 could have been a really revolutionary year politically. And one hopes that activists will continue to pressure the party to do better, because the fact of the matter is the establishment will never get it right. It's going to come from the grassroots. It's going to come from people demanding something better. And I'm honored today to be with folks who are in that demanding something better camp. Thanks so much for having me.